Welcome to a world where science collides with the paranormal, and the most ordinary events can hide ancient secrets. In a small coastal town, people live their everyday lives, unaware that beneath their feet lie forgotten corridors and artifacts capable of altering reality. Elias and Liana thought they had stabilized the town, but the anomalies did not stop. They multiplied. Each day brought new distortions, a fisherman pulling nets full of coins from centuries past, children speaking in languages long dead, birds flying backward against the wind. These were no longer isolated disturbances. The keepers were weaving overlapping timelines together. One morning, the mayor summoned them to the council hall. Maps of nearby towns lay spread across the table, covered in pins and scribbled notes. "It's spreading," he said grimly. "Villages 30 miles inland are reporting the same phenomena. Forests are shifting, rivers changing their course overnight. You've seen what happens here. Tell me, how do we stop it before it consumes everything?" Liana studied the maps, her expression tight. "This isn't random," she explained. "The keepers are creating a convergence, a merging of timelines across multiple regions. They want to see if we can survive in a reality where past, present, and future collapse together." Elias placed the key on the table. It pulsed faintly, echoing the disturbances across the land. "This will guide us," he said. "But it's not enough to stabilize one town. We'll need to expand the mirror network. Not just here, but across forests, rivers, and mountains." So began their journey inland. The first convergence point lay deep in a forest, where hunters reported impossible creatures roaming between the trees, animals stitched together from different eras, mammoths beside wolves, birds with reptilian wings, deer flickering in and out of existence. As Elias and Liana entered, the forest shifted around them, time folding and enfolding like a breathing organism. They placed mirrors along the paths, glyphs etched into tree trunks, while the key pulsed stronger with each step. But the keepers fought back. Illusions of loved ones appeared, calling them deeper into the woods. Entire clearings repeated themselves, trapping them in loops. Shadows of civilizations that had once thrived in the region whispered warnings. Hours stretched into what felt like days, until finally they reached the heart of the forest, a massive stone circle, half buried and glowing faintly with the same energy as the key. The convergence pulsed here, a vortex of shifting timelines swirling above the stones. Liana began chanting, her voice weaving stability into the mirrors, while Elias raised the key, channeling light into the circle. The ground shook. Echoes of the forest's past roared to life, phantom fires, armies marching, storms tearing trees apart. Then future echoes appeared, machines cutting down trees, cities rising on the ruins. All of it collided in one chaotic swirl, threatening to consume them. But Elias and Liana stood their ground. The mirrors reflected the key's resonance into the vortex, harmonizing fragments of time into a single flow. The storm collapsed inward, leaving the forest silent once more. Exhausted, they emerged, only to see the horizon glowing unnaturally. Liana's face grew pale. "That's not the end," she said. "The convergence is larger than we thought. This was only one node. The keepers are constructing a network across the land." Elias held the key tightly. Its pulse was stronger than ever. "Then part two begins here," he said. "We'll have to follow every node, stabilize them one by one, before the convergence becomes irreversible." And in the hidden folds of time, the keepers stirred, their experiment entering its most dangerous stage. The forest node was only the beginning. As Elias and Liana rested on the edge of the woods, the key pulsed with no urgency, its glow shifting toward the east. The next convergence point awaited. They traveled for 2 days until they reached the riverlands. The once stable river now defied every law of nature. Some stretches ran upstream, others split into dozens of smaller streams, then collapsed back into a single torrent. Along the banks, fragments of bridges from different centuries appeared and vanished, wooden crossings from the past, metal arches from the future, all flickering in and out. Fishermen stared helplessly as boats were pulled into whirlpools that opened and closed like breathing wounds in the water. "This isn't just a disruption," Liana murmured. "The river has become a timeline itself, flowing across different centuries." They began setting up mirrors on the banks, anchoring glyphs into stones and fallen trees. The reflections trembled, fighting against the chaotic flow of the river. Elias raised the key, but its resonance faltered, distorted by the shifting currents. The water roared, and a colossal form emerged from the depths, a serpent woven from liquid and shadow, its scales reflecting entire lifetimes. In one instant, Elias saw it as a prehistoric beast. In the next, as a machine of metal and glass. The river serpent was a temporal guardian, a construct of the keepers, forged to protect the node. The battle was relentless. Each strike from the serpent sent waves surging, collapsing their mirrors, erasing glyphs, drowning them in echoes of the past. Elias nearly lost the key when the serpent's jaws snapped shut inches from his hand. But Liana screamed an incantation, her voice resonating with the rhythm of the river, forcing the current to align for a heartbeat. Now, she shouted. Elias plunged the key into the river itself. A blinding pulse spread through the waters, and the serpent dissolved into mist, its many timelines scattering. The river stabilized, its flow returning to the present. The banks grew still. The fishermen stared in awe, whispering prayers to powers they could not name. But before relief could settle, the horizon lit up again, this time to the north. Flickering towers of light rose above the mountains, spiraling into the sky. The third node, Liana said, her voice heavy. The mountains are next. They climbed for days, through frozen passes and shifting trails. The higher they went, the stranger the distortions became. At one point, they walked through an abandoned village only to return minutes later and find it populated again, alive with people who vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. In the night, they heard echoes of avalanches that never came, and stars that didn't belong to the present sky. At last they reached the summit. There stood a massive stone arch carved into the mountain, glowing faintly with the same energy as the key. This was no accident. The ancients had built something here, perhaps knowing the keepers would return. As Elias lifted the key, the arch flared, and the entire mountain shuddered. From the sky descended a storm unlike any they had seen. Lightning struck in reverse, climbing upward. Shadows of armies clashed across the cliffs, past wars bleeding into present reality. And at the heart of it all, a figure emerged from the storm, a keeper's avatar, fully formed, no longer a mere echo or shadow. It was tall, faceless, and cloaked in shifting fragments of time. With each step, the mountain bent, paths rearranging themselves. This was no test. It was war. Liana braced herself, mirrors in both hands. They've stopped hiding, she said. This is their first true strike. Elias tightened his grip on the key, its light flaring brighter than ever. Then we strike back. The storm raged. The mountain trembled. The convergence deepened. The keeper's avatar loomed over the mountain pass, its form flickering between ages, times, and possibilities. Every step it took reshaped the cliffs, twisted the paths, and sent avalanches cascading into valleys that had never existed. Elias raised the key. Its pulse was wild, but he focused on the present, visualizing the mountain as it truly was, stable, grounded, real. Liana positioned mirrors across the ridges, reflecting the key's light into every fold of the terrain, anchoring reality against the avatar's distortions. The first attack came without warning. The avatar swung an arm, and entire sections of the mountain multiplied in impossible loops, forcing Elias and Liana to dodge collapsing cliffs and phantom chasms. Shadows of warriors from multiple timelines surged at them, striking with ancient weapons that flickered in and out of existence. Focus on resonance, not strength. Liana shouted. We can't overpower it, we have to harmonize it. Elias adjusted the key, sending pulses that reinforced the mirror's reflections. Slowly, the chaotic fragments of the mountain began to stabilize. Loops of falling rocks and phantom cliffs dissolved, and the warriors' shadows faltered as the mirrored network forced them to confront their own illusions. The avatar roared, a sound that vibrated through time itself, shaking the mountain to its core. From the storm above, temporal lightning struck in reverse, freezing the air mid-motion, bending shadows unnaturally. Elias realized the avatar was not just attacking, they were being tested in perception, decision-making, and coordination. One wrong movement could trap them in a temporal echo for eternity. Mirror the key's pulse across all nodes. Liana screamed. We can force it into a single timeline. Together, they created a cascading network of light and reflection. Each mirror acted as a node, directing the key's energy through the mountain, anchoring past, present, and potential futures to a single, stable timeline. The avatar faltered, its form flickering violently, able to maintain coherence across so many layers of reality simultaneously. Elias leapt forward. sending a pulse from the key directly into the avatar. Light flared, the mountain quaked, and the figure shattered into fragments, faces, limbs, and shadows collapsing into nothingness. The storm dissipated, the mountain returned to its natural state, and the air was silent. Breathing heavily, Elias and Liana surveyed the summit. "One node down," Elias said, his voice tight. "But the convergence isn't over. There are more nodes across the continent, and each will be worse." Liana looked to the horizon. Valleys, forests, rivers, they all shimmered faintly, affected by temporal distortions. "The keepers aren't just testing a town or a mountain," she said. "They're building a network. We've stabilized 3 nodes, but if we don't reach the rest, this convergence could collapse the entire region into chaos." The key pulsed again, stronger than ever. Elias knew that every node they stabilized would make the next fight harder. The keepers were learning from their methods, adapting, preparing. "We follow the network," he said. "Every river, every city, every forest, until we either stabilize it or die trying." As they descended the mountain, the wind carried whispers of alternate realities, the echoes of the keepers observing consciousness. The convergence was far from over, and the world was becoming their labyrinth. After stabilizing the mountain node, Elias and Liana journeyed toward the nearest city, where the next convergence was forming. From a distance, the skyline shimmered naturally. Buildings flickered between old and new. Streets rearranged themselves in impossible loops, and people moved in repeating patterns, sometimes freezing mid-step before resuming as if nothing had happened. "This is worse than the mountains," Liana said, scanning the urban grid. "Here, human activity interacts with temporal distortions. One wrong reflection could trap thousands in a loop forever." Elias nodded. He adjusted the key, its glow casting long shadows across streets that didn't align with the present. They began setting mirrors across rooftops and alleys, connecting them with glyphs etched into lampposts, bridges, and public squares. Each placement required precision. Even a single misaligned mirror could create a feedback loop, amplifying the anomalies rather than containing them. As they worked, fragments of alternate timelines began to bleed into the city. Horse-drawn carriages appeared alongside speeding cars, soldiers from past wars marched in formation on city streets, and spectral skyscrapers rose and fell in seconds. Elias felt the key vibrating violently as the density of overlapping realities increased. Then the hybrid entities appeared. Creatures forged from overlapping timelines, half human, half machine, or twisted versions of animals emerged from shadows and reflective surfaces. One had the body of a lion but the head of a clock, its eyes rotating like gears. Another was a phantom child, repeating the same gesture endlessly but duplicating itself every few seconds. "We have to isolate the nodes inside the city," Liana shouted. She traced sigils along rooftops and streets, linking mirrors into a dynamic network that could reflect the key's energy across multiple timelines simultaneously. The battle escalated. The hybrid creatures attacked with unpredictable abilities. Some could phase through walls, others could freeze time for a few seconds, and some distorted gravity, sending debris and people floating into the air. Elias pulsed the key, each wave of light destabilizing the creatures temporarily, but the density of anomalies made progress slow. Hours passed. Every corner of the city became a battleground of time. Liana adjusted the network constantly, harmonizing echoes of the past with the present, while Elias channeled the key's resonance into the most unstable intersections. The hybrid entities faltered as reflections from the mirrors forced them to confront versions of themselves across timelines. Finally, a massive pulse from the key, amplified by the mirrors, struck the heart of the urban convergence. Time rippled violently, and the hybrid creatures disintegrated, collapsing into their respective timelines. Buildings flickered once, then returned to the present, and the streets settled. The city seemed normal again, though a faint shimmer lingered in the air, a reminder that the keepers were observing, learning. Elias slumped against a building, exhausted. 2 nodes down. 1 forest, 1 mountain, 1 river. Now this city. How many more? Liana shook her head. The keepers are building a network across the continent. We've slowed them, but each victory makes the next node harder, and the anomalies are starting to interact. Soon, nodes won't be isolated, we'll have multiple distortions colliding at once. Elias stared at the skyline, watching ordinary people walking through a city that had just survived temporal chaos. Then we prepare for the next convergence, he said. and hope we're ready for what the keepers have in store. Above the city, shadows flickered, fragments of past and future bleeding into the present. Somewhere in the folds of time, the keepers watched, adapting, learning, waiting for the moment to strike again. After the city, Elias and Liana knew their next stop had to be the coast. The lighthouse, the origin of their journey, was now pulsing faintly again. But this time, the distortion had spread outward into the surrounding coastline, linking with anomalies from the forest, river, mountains, and city. The keepers were no longer testing isolated nodes, they were merging them, creating a continental network of temporal chaos. As they approached the shore, the sea shimmered naturally. Waves moved in impossible patterns, rising and falling in reverse, forming spiral whirlpools that reached into the clouds. The lighthouse itself seemed to bend in and out of time, its walls shifting between pristine, ruined, and partially submerged states. In the sky, storm clouds flickered between day and night, while distant echoes of ships both real and spectral sailed across invisible currents of time. "This is the final node," Liana said, her voice tense. "If we fail here, the entire network could collapse into a permanent temporal distortion. Whole regions could vanish or become trapped in overlapping timelines." Elias adjusted the key, its resonance now reacting to all previous nodes simultaneously. He realized that stabilizing this node required synchronizing with every other one: the forest, the river, the mountain, and the city. It wasn't enough to anchor the lighthouse, they had to harmonize the entire continental network at once. They began placing mirrors along cliffs, docks, and lighthouse walls, connecting them with glyphs drawn into stone, sand, and metal. Each mirror reflected the key's energy into the surrounding anomalies, but the density of overlapping realities made progress dangerous. Shadows of hybrid creatures emerged, past warriors, spectral animals, distorted humans, and phantom machines, all converging on the lighthouse simultaneously. The keeper's avatar appeared again, larger and more complex than before, composed of fragments from every node they had stabilized. Its presence bent reality. Waves froze mid-crash, cliffs looped upon themselves, and echoes of the city's streets spiraled into the sand. "We have to harmonize them all at once," Liana shouted. "The key can do it, but we need perfect coordination." Elias and Liana synchronized their actions. The mirrors reflected the key's pulses into every distortion simultaneously, while Liana chanted a resonance that anchored the nodes to the present timeline. Waves of energy radiated outward, forcing hybrid creatures and shadows to confront their own fractured timelines. The avatar roared, its form collapsing and rebuilding as it tried to maintain control over the network. The battle reached its climax. Time itself trembled, waves collided with mountains, cities flickered into forests, and shadows of people and animals twisted in every direction. Elias focused the key, channeling all energy into the lighthouse, while Liana harmonized the mirrors to create a cascading feedback loop across all nodes. With a blinding pulse, the network stabilized. The sea calmed, the lighthouse solidified in its present state. The mountains and forests stopped shifting, rivers returned to normal flow, and the city became coherent once more. Hybrid creatures dissolved, and the avatar of the keepers shattered into countless temporal fragments, leaving only silence. Elias and Liana collapsed on the sand, exhausted but alive. Around them, the coastline looked ordinary again, though a faint shimmer lingered, a reminder that the keepers were observing, learning, and adapting. Liana looked out over the horizon. "We've stabilized the nodes, for now, but this is only part of the convergence. The keepers' network spans farther than we know. There are likely more nodes in distant lands, hidden in time itself." Elias held the key tightly, its glow now steady but faint. "Then we continue. If the keepers are building a global network, we'll follow it to the end. Every node, every distortion, every shadow. They won't succeed while we're still here. Far across the world, beyond forests, mountains, and oceans, the keepers stirred. Their experiment had been challenged but not defeated. And in the hidden folds of time, they waited, preparing the next stage of the convergence. Even after stabilizing the coastal node, Elias and Liana knew the convergence was far from over. The key pulsed faintly, but the anomalies no longer followed isolated patterns. They began interacting across vast distances. Shadows from the city flickered in the forest, phantom rivers twisted into the mountains, and echoes of past storms rolled over the coastline. Each node they stabilized was now linked, and the keepers were learning to manipulate these connections. Traveling inland from the lighthouse, they noticed small distortions along the roads. Trees bent unnaturally, townspeople occasionally froze mid-step, and fragments of abandoned buildings appeared in empty fields. Liana mapped each disturbance carefully, tracing faint energy threads back to the nodes they had already stabilized. "They're connecting the nodes," she said. "The keepers are trying to merge all timelines into a single, global network. If we don't anticipate it, entire regions could become permanent anomalies." Their next stop was the Riverlands. The rivers had shifted, combining waters from multiple timelines. A boat moving downstream might suddenly appear upstream or in a completely different century. Elias and Liana positioned mirrors along the banks, linking them to the key, while Liana inscribed glyphs to stabilize the flow. The hybrid river guardian emerged again, an enormous serpentine entity, its scales reflecting centuries of events, from prehistoric floods to futuristic dam constructions. The battle was brutal. Each pulse of the key had to be timed precisely with Liana's spells. One misstep, and a fragment of the river could collapse a town into a temporal void. But the hybrid creature was no longer isolated. It interacted with echoes from the mountains and forests, creating unpredictable patterns. Elias and Liana realized that they were fighting not only a single anomaly, but the combined intelligence of multiple nodes. Coordinated by the keepers, hours of precise adjustments and harmonized pulses finally worked. The river returned to its present flow, the hybrid guardian dissolved into mist, and fragments of past and future receded. Exhausted, they realized that the nodes were becoming increasingly interconnected. Each victory made the next challenge exponentially harder. Liana looked at Elias, eyes grave. The convergence isn't just about stabilizing nodes anymore. It's about understanding the entire network. The keepers are no longer testing us, they're forcing us to map reality itself, thread by thread. Elias clenched the key. "Then we continue. Every node we stabilize weakens their influence. But this network, it's global. This is only the beginning." The horizon shimmered faintly. Beyond the forests, mountains, rivers, and cities, distant nodes flickered into existence, invisible to ordinary eyes. Somewhere, in those hidden pockets of time, the keepers watched, adapting, learning, waiting for their next move. The convergence had escalated. Elias and Liana had survived, but the real challenge, traversing a network of anomalies that spanned continents, was only beginning. Elias and Liana had stabilized the coastal, urban, mountain, forest, and river nodes, but the anomalies were no longer confined to familiar regions. From the lighthouse, the key pulsed stronger, resonating with faint distortions visible even from miles away. The keepers were no longer testing isolated nodes, they were linking them into a global network. And the convergence was escalating, traveling inland and toward distant towns. The duo observed strange phenomena. Roads folded upon themselves. Entire towns flickered between centuries, and shadows of people appeared and disappeared mid-action. Liana's maps were filled with overlapping timelines, showing threads of energy linking nodes across vast distances. "They're building a continent-wide lattice," she said. "Every node is now part of a single network. If one destabilizes, it could cascade into multiple regions at once." Their next stop was a large inland city, where the temporal distortions had begun to interact. Skyscrapers flickered between construction and ruin, citizens walked in impossible loops, and hybrid creatures, human-animal-machine amalgamations, emerged from reflective surfaces. These creatures seemed to coordinate, as if the nodes themselves were controlling them. Elias raised the key, sending pulsing waves of light through mirrors placed along rooftops, streets, and public squares. Liana's glyphs resonated with the key, stabilizing sections of the city temporarily. But the hybrid entities adapted rapidly, shifting patterns and exploiting unstable points in the network. Hours of precise coordination and pulse synchronization finally worked. The city returned to a coherent present, the hybrid entities disintegrated, and the distortions faded. But Elias and Liana realized that the keeper's intelligence had grown. The anomalies were no longer isolated. Each node could influence the others, and the convergence could cascade unpredictably across the continent. Looking at the key, Elias said, "We've slowed them, but every victory makes the network stronger. The keepers aren't just observing, they're learning, adapting. The next node will be even worse." Liana nodded, her gaze scanning the horizon. The convergence is no longer regional, it's global. Forests, rivers, mountains, cities, and coastlines we haven't even reached yet. This is only the beginning of the network. We need to prepare for multiple nodes activating at once. The key pulsed violently, and the air shimmered. Distant towns flickered in and out of existence. From the horizon, waves of temporal energy began converging toward them, signaling that the next phase of the Keeper's experiment was imminent. Multiple nodes interacting simultaneously, testing every limit of human perception, courage, and coordination. Elias and Liana tightened their grip on the key and mirrors. The convergence had escalated into a battle not just for towns or regions, but for reality itself. And somewhere in the folds of time, the Keepers watched, calculating, adapting, preparing for their next strike. Elias and Liana barely had time to catch their breath before the key pulsed violently. The anomalies were no longer isolated. Multiple nodes across the continent were activating at once. Forests, rivers, mountains, cities, and the coast were now connected in a single and stable network. The air shimmered with temporal energy, and the ground trembled as if reality itself were fracturing. Multiple nodes at the same time, Liana said, her voice tight. We're not just stabilizing isolated points anymore, we're trying to anchor entire regions simultaneously. One misstep and the convergence could cascade uncontrollably. They raced from node to node, using mirrors and glyphs to harmonize the key's pulses across all distortions. In the forest, phantom animals from past and future centuries moved through shifting trees. In the rivers, currents ran backward, carrying fragments of cities and civilizations long vanished. In the mountains, avalanches collided with impossible cliff formations. And in the urban centers, hybrid creatures, humans fused with animals, and machines emerged from reflective surfaces, attacking anything that interfered with their timeline. The key pulsed faster, resonating with each node simultaneously. Elias and Liana moved like a single unit, directing the mirrors and chanting glyphs in rhythm with the key's energy. Shadows of themselves appeared from alternate timelines, mimicking their actions, trying to disrupt their coordination. We can't fight them individually, Liana shouted over the roar of overlapping storms. We have to harmonize the network as one. Elias concentrated, focusing the key's energy outward. Pulses spread through the mirrors and glyphs, forcing each node to align with the present timeline. Forest, river, mountain, city, and coast began to stabilize, but the Keeper's avatar appeared at the heart of the network, towering over the convergence like a living storm of fragments. Its form flickered between all the nodes simultaneously, merging shadows, creatures, and terrain into a single chaotic mass. The final battle began. Hybrid entities surged, rivers and mountains twisted, storms collided with city streets. The key's pulses illuminated the chaos, while Liana's glyphs channeled stabilizing energy across the network. Each pulse fractured the avatar's form, but it reassembled immediately, adapting to their attacks. Time itself trembled. Past, present, and future collided. The hybrid entities fought with impossible abilities. Some froze fragments of the nodes, others distorted gravity or space, and some merged with the environment to become nearly indestructible. Elias and Liana had to think several steps ahead, predicting the interactions of every node and countering the Keeper's adaptations in real time. Finally, after hours of perfect synchronization, the mirrors reflected the key's energy into the heart of the avatar. The storm of time fractured, the hybrid entities dissolved, and the nodes stabilized. Forests, rivers, mountains, cities, and coastlines settled into coherent timelines. The Keeper's avatar fragmented, disappearing into temporal echoes. Exhausted, Elias and Liana collapsed, staring at the horizon. The network was stable, for now, but they knew the Keepers were far from defeated. The global network was vast, and more nodes hidden and unknown still waited. Liana whispered, "We've survived the first multi-node convergence. But the Keepers are patient. This was only the opening act of their experiment. The real test is coming." Elias held the key, its pulse now steady but ominous. "Then we follow the network. Every node, every distortion, every shadow, we finish this, no matter what it takes." Far across the world, in the folds of time, the Keepers watched. Their experiment had been challenged, but it had not ended. The convergence was only beginning.